Ma'am, I need you to stop right there.
Excuse me? What's this about?
Put your phone down. Hands where I can see them.
Officer, I'm talking to my daughter. What's the problem?
I said put the phone down. Now.
The morning air in downtown Atlanta was crisp for late September, the kind that made you glad you'd grabbed a jacket on the way out. Peachtree Street hummed with his usual Tuesday rhythm. Business people clutching coffee cups, students rushing to MARTA stations, delivery trucks double-parked with hazards blinking. Judge Alexis Lewis stood on the sidewalk outside the Richard B. Russell Federal Building, phone pressed to her ear, talking her daughter through a college application essay crisis. Maya was a senior at Spelman, panicking about her personal statement for Columbia Law, and Alexis had stepped outside during a brief recess to calm her down. Baby, just write from your heart. They don't want perfect, they want authentic. She paused as a police cruiser pulled up to the curb 20 feet away. Hang on, Maya. 2 officers got out. The first was a white man, early 40s, with the kind of military posture that suggested either service or aspiration. His nameplate read T. Dawson. His partner was younger, Latino, with wary eyes that kept scanning the street. R. Vasquez. They walked directly toward her. Alexis's stomach tightened, the same visceral response she'd felt 1,000 times before, the one she'd never quite learned to suppress, that primal awareness that her presence was being evaluated, categorized, judged. Maya, I'll call you back. She ended the call. Dawson stopped 3 feet away, hand resting on his belt. Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions. Alexis kept her voice calm, professional. Certainly, officer. What can I help you with? We received reports of someone taking photographs of this building. Was that you? Alexis blinked. I haven't taken any photographs. I've been on a phone call. You were holding your phone up, pointed at the building. I was talking to my daughter, Alexis said slowly, about college applications. I'm not photographing anything. Dawson's expression didn't change. In the current climate, we take security around federal buildings very seriously. We're going to need to see some identification. The current climate. Alexis knew exactly what that meant. The vague, all-purpose justification for treating anyone who looked wrong as a potential threat. Officer Dawson, I work in this building. I'm here every day. What specifically about my behavior suggested I was a security threat? Ma'am, this is a simple request. Show me your ID and we can all move on. Alexis felt the familiar calculation begin. She'd done this math her entire adult life, in courtrooms, at airports, in her own neighborhood. How much compliance keeps me safe? How much pushback preserves dignity? Where exactly is the line? She glanced around. A small crowd was forming. People slowing their walks, pretending to check phones while watching. A woman in a business suit had stopped completely, openly staring. A delivery driver sat in his truck, window down, recording on his phone. Good. Witnesses. Officer Dawson, I'm happy to provide identification, Alexis said, her voice carrying that particular clarity she used when she wanted every word documented. But I'd like to understand the legal basis for this stop. Am I being detained? Dawson's jaw tightened. We're conducting an investigation. Into what crime? Suspicious activity near a federal facility. And what activity specifically did you observe? You were taking photographs. I wasn't. I was on a phone call. You can see my call log if you like. Vasquez shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. Dawson took a step closer. Ma'am, are you refusing to comply with a lawful order? Alexis said, I'm asking you to articulate reasonable suspicion. That's not refusal. That's my constitutional right. A black woman in her 60s stopped walking, reusable grocery bags in hand. Officers, that woman comes here every day. She's not doing anything wrong. Dawson didn't even look at her. Ma'am, step back. This doesn't concern you. The hell it doesn't, the woman muttered, but she stayed put, bags clutched tight. Alexis took a slow breath. She thought about her chambers upstairs, 4th floor, corner office with a view of Centennial Olympic Park. She thought about the brass nameplate on her door, Honorable Alexis Lewis, United States District Court of the Northern Georgia. She thought about the sentencing hearing scheduled for 10:30 a.m., thought about her law clerks upstairs, probably wondering where she'd gone, thought about the defendant, a 19-year-old kid charged with felony possession, sitting in a holding cell, terrified. She thought about Maya, her brilliant, beautiful daughter, probably staring at her phone right now, wondering why Mom hung up so abruptly. Officer Dawson, my name is Alexis Lewis. I'm a United States District Judge for the Northern District of Georgia. I work in this building. I've worked here for 9 years. If you'll allow me to reach into my jacket pocket, I'll show you my credentials. The words hung in the air. Dawson and Vasquez exchanged a glance. Not shock exactly, something more complicated, doubt mixed with calculation. A judge, Dawson repeated slowly. Yes. Vasquez spoke the first time with something other than accusation in his voice. In this building? 4th floor. You can call courthouse security if you'd like to verify. Ask for Captain Bernard Willis. He's been working the front desk for 12 years. He'll confirm who I am. Dawson's face was unreadable. Let me see the credentials. Alexis reached slowly into her jacket's inner pocket, telegraphing every movement, just like she'd taught Maya to do if she ever got pulled over, and withdrew her credential case. Inside was her Federal Judiciary ID, the kind with the gold seal of the United States District Court embossed across the top.
She handed it to Dawson. He studied it under the morning sunlight, tilting it to catch the holographic security features. His partner leaned in to look. Alexis watched the exact moment recognition settled across their faces. The delivery driver was still recording. The woman with grocery bags had been joined by 2 younger black women, all 3 standing like sentries. A white man in running gear had stopped mid-jog, AirPods dangling, watching with open curiosity. Dawson handed back her credentials. Judge Lewis, there's been a misunderstanding. We responded to a call about suspicious activity and you saw a black woman standing outside a federal building with her phone and assumed I was photographing it for nefarious purposes, Alexis finished. Her voice wasn't angry, just precise, clinical. The way she sounded when she was about to issue a ruling she knew would be controversial. Ma'am, Your Honor, we were doing our job. We have to investigate all reports. What reports specifically? Who called? What did they say? Vasquez glanced at Dawson, clearly out of his depth. Dawson said, It came through dispatch, anonymous tip. Anonymous, Alexis repeated. And you didn't think to observe me for more than 5 seconds before approaching. You didn't notice I was on a phone call, not photographing anything. You didn't consider that maybe, just maybe, someone who looked like me might actually belong here. The crowd had grown. Alexis counted at least 15 people now, a mix of races and ages, all of them watching this play out on a public sidewalk in the heart of downtown Atlanta. Dawson's face had gone red. Judge Lewis, we apologize for any inconvenience. Inconvenience? The word came out sharper than she intended. Officer Dawson, in approximately 20 minutes, I have a sentencing hearing. A young man's future hangs in the balance. And right now, I'm standing on a public sidewalk explaining to police officers that I have a right to exist in front of my own workplace. She paused. Do you understand how that feels? Dawson didn't answer. Vasquez looked at his shoes. The woman with groceries called out, You tell him, sister. Alexis took her credentials back, slipped them into her pocket. Am I free to go, officers? Yes, ma'am, Your Honor, of course. Thank you. She walked past them, back toward the building entrance. The crowd parted for her. The woman with groceries squeezed her arm as she passed, a silent gesture of solidarity. At the door, Alexis swiped her badge. The security scanner beeped green. Captain Willis looked up from his station, saw her face, and immediately stood. Judge Lewis, you all right? I'm fine, Bernard. just fine. She walked through the metal detector, collected her bag, and headed for the elevator. By the time the doors closed, her hands were shaking. The story didn't start on a sidewalk in Atlanta. It started in Birmingham, Alabama, where a girl named Alexis Lewis watched her father come home from his shift at the steel mill with blood on his collar. She was 7 years old. She asked him what happened. He told her he'd been walking to his car when 3 white men decided he'd looked at one of them wrong. Told her they'd pushed him against a fence, held him there while they went through his pockets, took his wallet, took the $23 he'd earned that day. Her mother said, "Don't tell her these things, Raymond. She's too young." Her father said, "She needs to know what the world is." Alexis didn't understand then, but she remembered. She remembered when it happened to her older brother, Marcus, stopped outside a movie theater at 16 because he and his friends looked suspicious, standing in line to buy tickets. She remembered her first semester at Howard University, walking across the yard at dusk when campus police stopped her to ask if she was lost. She wasn't lost. She was going to the library. But something about her being there didn't fit their picture of who belonged. She remembered law school at Yale, where a professor once called her surprisingly articulate after she presented her moot court argument. Remembered the way the words stuck in her throat. Remembered going back to her dorm and crying until her roommate, a white girl from Connecticut who'd never been stopped by police in her life, asked what was wrong. Nothing, Alexis said, just tired. By the time she graduated, Alexis Lewis had learned to channel rage into precision. She became a public defender in Fulton County because she wanted to see the system from the inside, wanted to understand how it bent, where it broke, who it protected, and who it ground to dust. She lost more cases than she won, not because she wasn't brilliant, she was, but because the system wasn't designed for her clients to win. But she won enough. She won the case that got Terrell Jackson released after he'd served 14 years for an armed robbery he didn't commit. The real perpetrator had confessed, but it took 7 appeals before anyone listened. She won the case that forced the Atlanta Police Department to revise its use of force policies after a grandmother was shot during a no-knock raid on the wrong address. She won the case that kept 2 teenagers out of adult prison for a crime they'd committed while homeless, desperate, and terrified. At 34, she became a federal prosecutor, not because she loved the government, but because she believed the system could be better if the right people were inside it, fighting. She prosecuted civil rights violations, hate crimes, police misconduct cases that other prosecutors wouldn't touch. And then, 15 years ago, she was nominated to the federal bench. Her confirmation hearing was brutal. Senators questioned her temperament, her advocacy background, whether someone who'd spent her career defending criminals could be trusted to uphold law and order. One senator, she'd never forget this, asked if she could put aside her personal experiences and rule impartially, as if her experiences weren't exactly what qualified her. She was confirmed 51-49. Since then, Judge Alexis Lewis had presided over thousands of cases. She'd issued rulings on voting rights, housing discrimination, employment law, immigration, criminal justice reform. Her opinions were cited in the 11th Circuit. Law review articles analyzed her reasoning. Young attorneys competed to clerk for her because she taught them to think systematically, write clearly, and never assume the law would protect people just because it was supposed to. She'd earned respect, authority, a lifetime appointment, and none of it had mattered on that sidewalk.
Officer Timothy Dawson had his own story, too. He'd grown up in Marietta, son of a cop and a nurse. Solid family, good values. He joined the Atlanta Police Department at 24, believing he'd make a difference, and for a while he thought he did. Helped lost tourists find their hotels, responded to domestic calls and talked people down. Got a commendation for pulling a woman from a burning car. But 18 years on patrol changes you. You see patterns. You respond to the same corners. You start making assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't. Dawson had never been written up for excessive force, never fired his weapon outside the range. His record was clean, which in his mind meant he was doing it right. What his record didn't show was all the stops that never became arrests, all the suspicious people he'd questioned who turned out to be going about their day, all the times he demanded ID from black men standing outside their own homes. He'd stopped Alexis Lewis because she fit a pattern he'd learned to recognize. Black woman, nice clothes, standing outside a federal building with a phone. Could be casing the location, could be planning something, could be nothing, but better safe than sorry. That's what he told himself. What he didn't tell himself was that he'd walked past a white man actually photographing the building's facade that same morning. Some architecture student with a DSLR and a tripod, taking detailed shots of the limestone columns. Dawson had nodded at him and kept walking. When Vasquez handed him Alexis's credentials and he saw the words United States District Court, something cold and heavy settled in Dawson's chest. He knew what this could become. Complaint filed, internal affairs, media attention. His name attached to words like racial profiling and abuse of authority. 18 years of service reduced to one bad stop. Except it wasn't one stop. If he was honest, really honest, there had been dozens, hundreds maybe. Moments where he'd acted on gut feeling instead of evidence, where he'd interpreted presence as suspicion, where he demanded compliance without offering explanation. He just hadn't stopped a federal judge before. Alexis sat in her chambers that afternoon, door closed, building quiet. Most of the staff had gone home. Her law clerks, Jordan and Priya, had left hours ago. Outside her window, Atlanta glowed amber as the sun set behind Stone Mountain. She'd written everything down, every word exchanged, every gesture. The time, 9:47 a.m. The location, East Entrance, Russell Federal Building. The officers' names and badge numbers. 3 single-spaced pages of documentation that would hold up in any proceeding. The question was, what would she do with it? She thought about calling her husband, James. He'd be furious. He was a sociology professor at Emory, spent his career studying institutional racism, and he'd want her to file immediately, to use every tool at her disposal. She thought about calling her father, still alive at 79, still living in Birmingham. He'd tell her to be careful, that making waves had consequences, especially for people like them. She thought about Maya, probably still stressing about her personal statement, not knowing her mother had spent the morning being detained outside her own workplace. Her desk phone rang. Internal line. Judge Lewis? Judge, it's Bernard at security. Captain Willis, who'd worked this building since before her appointment. Sorry to bother you, but there are 2 APD officers here asking to speak with you. No appointment. Say it's personal. Alexis's pulse quickened. Did they give names? Dawson and Vasquez. They're out of uniform. She was silent for a moment. Then, send them up. 3 minutes later, there was a knock on her chamber's door. Come in. Officers Dawson and Vasquez entered in street clothes, jeans, button-downs, like they'd come here straight from home. They looked uncomfortable, out of place among the law books and framed diplomas. Alexis didn't stand, didn't offer them seats. Officers, I'm surprised to see you. Dawson cleared his throat. Judge Lewis, we wanted to speak with you, off the record if possible. There's no such thing as off the record, but I'll listen. Vasquez spoke first, his voice quieter than it had been that morning. We wanted to apologize
for this morning. It was wrong." "Wrong," Alexis repeated. "In what way?" Dawson stepped forward slightly. "Judge, we're not here to make excuses. We're here because what happened today shouldn't have happened, and we know it." Alexis studied them. Dawson looked tired, older somehow than he had that morning. Vasquez looked young, scared even. "Who sent you?" she asked. "Nobody sent us," Dawson said. "We came on our own." "Why?" Vasquez answered. "Because I went home this afternoon and I couldn't stop thinking about it, about my mom. She's from Guatemala, came here when she was 19, works as a housekeeper at a hotel downtown. And she's been stopped by police 4 times in the last 3 years, just walking to work, looking suspicious." He paused. "And I realized today I did to you exactly what's been done to her, and I hated myself for it." The honesty caught Alexis off guard. Dawson added, "I've been on the force 18 years, and today was the first time I really understood how it feels from the other side. Not because you filed a complaint or threatened a lawsuit, but because you asked me a simple question, and I didn't have a good answer." "What question?" Alexis asked, though she knew. "You asked me if I understood how it felt to have to explain that you have a right to exist in front of your own workplace. And the truth is, I didn't, until I saw the look on your face." Silence settled over the room. Alexis sat back in her chair. "Do you know how many cases I've presided over that started exactly the way this morning started?" They didn't answer. 73, she said. "I counted this afternoon. 73 cases where police officers stopped someone for suspicious activity that turned out to be existing while black or brown or poor or homeless." She paused. "And almost every one of those cases, the officers testified that they followed procedure, that they had reasonable suspicion, that the plaintiff was non-compliant, evasive, threatening. You know what the difference is between those cases and what happened today?" "You're a judge," Vasquez said quietly. "No," Alexis said. "The difference is documentation, witnesses, credibility. The difference is that when I tell this story, people believe me. Most people don't get that presumption." Dawson nodded slowly. "I know." "Do you?" Alexis asked. "Because knowing and changing are 2 different things, Officer Dawson." More silence.
"I'm going to ask you something," Alexis said, "and I want you to think before you answer. If I hadn't been a judge, if I'd been a teacher, a nurse, an accountant, someone's grandmother, would you be here right now?" Dawson looked at the floor. Vasquez looked at Dawson. "Honestly," Dawson said finally, "probably not. I would have convinced myself the stop was justified, that I followed protocol, that if there was a problem, it wasn't mine." Alexis felt something unexpected then, not satisfaction, but something closer to sadness. "Last year," she said, "I sentenced a young man named Cameron Mitchell to 3 years in federal prison. 21 years old, first offense, got caught with pills he was selling to pay his mother's medical bills. The prosecutor pushed for the maximum because Cameron had failed to comply during a traffic stop, got mouthy with the officers, questioned why he was being searched." She paused. "I gave him 3 years because the sentencing guidelines didn't give me much choice, and I've thought about him every day since, wondered if maybe he got mouthy because he was tired, because he'd been stopped before, because being polite hadn't protected him any other time, so why would it now?" Dawson and Vasquez were both silent. "This morning, standing on that sidewalk, I understood exactly how Cameron Mitchell felt, and it made me sick." "Judge Lewis," Vasquez said, his voice strained, "what can we do?" Alexis considered this carefully. She thought about all the apologies she'd heard in her courtroom, some genuine, most tactical, some that changed behavior, most that didn't.
You can start by filing an honest report about what happened today, not a version that protects you, the truth, that you approached a citizen without reasonable suspicion, that you demanded ID with legal basis, that you only backed down when you learned who I was. That'll trigger an investigation, Dawson said. Yes. Could end our careers. Maybe. Or it could be the beginning of you doing your jobs correctly. Dawson met her eyes. Are you going to file a complaint? I haven't decided, Alexis said honestly. I'm still thinking about what serves justice better. What else? Vasquez asked. Alexis stood up, walked to her window. The city spread out below, lights flickering on as darkness settled over Atlanta. Training, she said. Real training. Not the box-checking diversity seminars you sit through once a year. I'm talking about officers learning what constitutional rights actually mean, learning to recognize their own biases, learning that my presence outside a federal building isn't suspicious, it's my job. She turned back to them. I want you both to volunteer for a program I'm going to propose. Community oversight, scenario training, accountability measures. And I want you to tell other officers what happened today, not the sanitized version, the real version, what you did wrong and why. And if we do that, Dawson asked, then maybe I'll believe this apology is about more than damage control. There was a long silence. Finally, Dawson nodded. Okay. Okay? We'll do it. The report, the training, whatever it takes. Vasquez nodded too. Yes, ma'am, Your Honor. Alexis walked back to her desk. She picked up the 3-page incident report and held it for a moment. Then she placed it in her drawer. I'm not filing this today, but I'm keeping it. And if I hear about another stop like this morning's, if I see evidence that either of you hasn't learned anything, I'll file it along with whatever new documentation exists. Are we clear? Yes, Judge, they said in unison. Good. Now get out of my office. They left quietly. Alexis sat back down, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. She pulled out her phone and called Maya. Her daughter answered on the first ring. Mom, you hung up so fast this morning. Everything okay? Can we talk? Alexis asked. I need to tell you about my day. Uh-oh, that tone. What happened? And Alexis told her every detail. The sidewalk, the stop, the crowd, the credentials, the officers showing up at her chambers. When she finished, Maya was silent for a long moment. Mom, she said finally, her voice tight, they detained you outside your own workplace? They did. And you're not going to file a complaint? I might. I haven't decided yet. What would you tell me to do, Maya asked, if it happened to me? Alexis closed her eyes. I'd tell you to document everything, to know your rights, to speak clearly so witnesses can hear. And then I'd tell you that sometimes justice looks different than we expect. Sometimes it's not about punishment, it's about change. Do you really believe that? Alexis thought about Dawson's face when she'd asked him if he would have apologized if she'd been someone else, thought about Vasquez talking about his mother, thought about 73 cases of people who'd stood exactly where she stood that morning. I'm trying to, she said, honestly. 6 weeks later, Judge Alexis Lewis stood in a conference room at the Atlanta Police Academy. It was a Saturday morning, voluntary attendance, but 53 officers had shown up. She'd spent the last month working with the department's training division, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and community organizers to design something new. Constitutional policing, implicit bias recognition, community accountability. Some officers came because they were curious. Some came because their supervisors suggested it. Some came because they'd been in situations like Dawson and Vasquez and wanted to understand how it could have gone differently. Dawson and Vasquez were both in the front row. Alexis didn't start with theory. She started with a question. How many of you have ever stopped someone and later realized you didn't have a good reason? 12 hands went up slowly, then 15, then 20. Thank you for that honesty, she said, because you can't fix what you won't acknowledge. She clicked to the first slide. a photo of herself standing outside the Russell Building, recreated for the presentation. "Let me tell you about the morning I became a statistic instead of a judge." The story spread quietly at first. Community organizers noticed, defense attorneys whispered about it in courthouse hallways. A journalist from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution requested an interview. Alexis declined, saying the work spoke for itself. Not everyone agreed with her approach. Some activists said she'd been too lenient, that officers like Dawson should have been fired, not retrained, that apologies without terminations were meaningless. Alexis understood their anger. She'd felt it herself. But she also knew that firing 2 officers would make headlines for a week and change nothing structurally. Complaints got buried, lawsuits took years, settlements came with NDAs. She'd chosen a different path, harder to quantify, harder to declare victory, but maybe more lasting. 4 months after the incident, Judge Alexis Lewis received a handwritten letter. It was from a woman named Shanice Thompson, a paralegal from Decatur. She'd been stopped by Officer Vasquez during a routine traffic stop, broken taillight. She'd asked why she was being pulled over, and instead of escalating, Vasquez explained patiently, shown her the light, given her a warning, told her where to get it fixed affordably, and wished her a good evening. "I don't know if this is connected to anything you're doing, but that officer treated me like a person, like I mattered. I wanted you to know it made a difference." Alexis pinned that letter to her bulletin board, next to Maya's college acceptance letter to Columbia Law. Over the next few months, more letters came. Not a flood, just a trickle, but it was something.
If you're enjoying this, make sure you like, drop a comment where you are watching from, hit the subscribe button, and share. 9 months after the sidewalk, Alexis sat in her chambers preparing for a sentencing hearing. The defendant was a 23-year-old named Jamal Henderson, second offense, drug possession, facing mandatory minimum guidelines that would send him to federal prison for 5 years. The stop had been clean. Traffic violation, consent to search, everything by the book. But Alexis had learned to read between the lines of by the book. She reviewed the officer's testimony, the defendant's history, the circumstances, the body camera footage. Then she looked at the sentencing guidelines and the discretion she had within them, narrow but present. She thought about that sidewalk, about Dawson and Vasquez, about Cameron Mitchell serving year 2 of his sentence, about how easily presence became suspicion, how quickly ordinary people became criminals. She issued her sentence, 2 years with credit for time served, followed by supervised release and mandatory drug treatment. The prosecutor objected loudly. The defendant's public defender looked shocked. Alexis explained her reasoning carefully. Rehabilitation research, recidivism statistics, the purpose of sentencing under federal law. Professional, thorough. But in her mind, she was thinking about a different measure of justice, the kind that recognized people's humanity before their mistakes, the kind she demanded on a sidewalk when 2 officers forgot hers. That evening, Alexis drove home through Atlanta traffic, past the Federal Building where it had happened. She didn't slow down, didn't look, just kept driving. Maya was home from spring break, sitting at the kitchen table with law school admission letters spread out in front of her. She looked up when her mother walked in. "Mom, Columbia said yes." Alexis's face broke into a genuine smile for the first time all week. "Baby, I'm so proud of you." They hugged for a long time. Later, over takeout Thai food, Maya said, "I've been thinking about my personal statement, the one I was freaking out about last fall." "The one you were working on when I got stopped?" "Yeah, I ended up writing about that day, about watching my mom become a federal judge and still have to prove she belongs, about wanting to be a lawyer who fights those fights." Alexis felt tears prick her eyes. "Can I read it?" Maya handed her phone over. Alexis read her daughter's words, smart, angry, hopeful, and thought about how many fights they'd already fought, how many more were coming,
how exhausting and necessary it all was. "It's perfect," she said, handing the phone back. "You're going to change things, baby." "We are going to change things," Maya corrected. "You already are." Outside, Atlanta settled into its evening rhythm. Inside, a federal judge and her daughter talked about justice, dignity, and the long work of making the world slightly better. One interaction at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one officer willing to change at a time. It wasn't the ending anyone wanted, but it was real, and it was far from over.